Welcome to the I Am Tech Meetup, sponsored by Content.ai and Headstack. Just going to move that across there. This month we're talking about accessibility, and we've got great presenters here talking about their experiences with accessibility, and we'd love to hear their talks. So just a quick thing about the I Am Tech Meetup. So who am I? I am Ilesh Mistry. I'm the founder and organizer of I Am Tech Meetup. I'm a senior front-end engineer and a Content.ai MVP. There's a QR code on the right-hand side if you want to try and contact me. The I Am Tech Meetup are generally front-end topics, and we try and sort of like add other topics to the mix as well that are related. If you want to know more about these sessions, then just follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you can hear about them in the future as well. If you want to talk about future meetup or topic that you know, or you know somewhere else, or even if you want to sponsor the meetup, please let me know, and we can go from there. A little bit about the sponsors. So Content.ai, they're a headless CMS that enables organizations to govern all things in content. So you can contact them via their sort of registrar free 90 days trial or the Discord server as well, so you can kind of look at them there. They are recruiting, so if you're looking for a new role that you want to swap positions with, check out their website. And then who are Headstack? So Headstack are basically allowing us to kind of promote our meetups online and collaborate, and also probably put all the meetups into one, so you can kind of have one platform to view all the meetups that you can attend. So check them out. Like, it's a good sort of like platform to start looking at other meetups that could be in your area or you might be interested in, especially in the tech industry. So just before we get started, just a couple of things. During the sessions, if you can just add your questions in the chat, there should be sort of like areas at the end to kind of, ask questions anyway. We'll be recording the sessions, as you can pretty much tell. And if you are, on social media, please, tag the I Am Tech Meetup or whatever, and just, and hopefully promote the event as well. And there will be opportunities to win some I Am Tech Meetup swag, which is like this. So hopefully, like throughout the sessions, I'll be chucking those links across anyway. So don't worry if you haven't got time to put it up, jot it down now. To go back to sort of like the main sort of agenda today, we've got Todd, who's going to be talking about deceptive patterns and fast. So that will be coming up first. Then we've got Daisy. She's going to be talking about unleashing mobile app accessibility, empowering every user. And then Ruben's going to finish us off with how to inspect accessibility tree and find accessibility issues. So really good topics that we have today. So I'm going to end my presentation and then hand over to Todd when you've got, when you're ready.
Thank you for having me today. I'll get this show on the road here. All right. My name is Todd Libby. I'm a senior accessibility engineer. I've been in accessibility for about 25 years now. I am a consultant. I work on my own, and I am based out of Phoenix, Arizona. I'm also an accessibility advocate, and I belong to the W3C, and I am an invited expert working on deceptive patterns that will be introduced in the FAST framework, which I'm talking about today, and working on WCAG 3 as well. So what is FAST? FAST is the framework for accessible specification of technologies. So basically what the framework is it advises creators on how to create technical specifications to ensure their technologies meet the needs of people with disabilities. Originally, this was designed for internal accessibility review at the W3C on specs, but we have released this to the public. There will be a link at the end that I can give to anybody who's interested, and you can read what we have so far. There's not a lot. It's still in the early stages of the first editor's draft. So our goals are very simple. We want to fill gaps in authoring tools where there are varying levels of accessibility needs, and it is intended to be a single optional and well-considered potential source of guidelines addressing specifically the features technologies need to provide to support accessibility. So basically, it's not a replacement for WCAG guidelines. It is an optional secondary set of potential guidelines that people and organizations can follow. So there are two basic needs when you break down accessibility. There are user needs and there are functional needs. And a user need is a high-level accessibility characteristic of content and or a user interface that is necessary for users to complete an objective. Say, for instance, one off the top of my head being somebody wants to copy and paste text from a document into a field, into a form online, for instance. And then a functional need is a statement that describes a specific gap in one's ability or a specific mismatch between the ability and the designed environment or context. Say, for instance, that ability being taken away when people disable copy and paste on forms. That's a functional need. So along with the four pillars of accessibility, which are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, we have added personalization and deceptive patterns to those four pillars. And these we've found over 1,500 intersections of user and functional needs that aren't really covered in the current 2.x versions of WCAG. So these gaps we hope to intend to fill, and we don't necessarily we are not going to be able to cover all of those because there's far more than probably 1,500, but we hopefully can get as many as possible. So the user needs that need to be analyzed on how they can be met. And how do we meet those needs? Author design and technical implementation, user agent accessibility support of standard and author implemented features, and assistive technology support, including API mediation. So there's 3 stages that we're working on. Currently, we are in between 1 and 2. So basically, we've inventoried functional and user needs, and we're currently identifying the ways to meet those needs. And the third stage being to develop technology guidelines to meet those needs as best we can. We are we have the rough draft, we have the editor's draft, but basically when WCAG 2.2 is all set and released to the public, then we're going to move on to meeting about this and meeting about WCAG 3. So once that's underway, we can work on this second stage. So here's an example. So deceptive practices go back as far as 1938. And this image of a
Todd,
German card.
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
The slides are not updating for if you're moving between slides.
I apologize for that. Which one do you see?
The first one, deceptive patterns and fast.
Oh, perfect. All right, let's just jump to this one. So here's this one. So in this image, it's an image of a German voting card, and this asks about the reunification of Austria with the German Reich. This is the first deceptive pattern that is known that there's an example of. Now, as you can see, the first circle, the bigger circle, is yes. The second circle being no, the smaller circle. This ballot asks the voter, do you approve of the reunification of Austria with the German Reich accomplished on 13 March 1938? And do you vote for the list of our Führer Adolf Hitler? So basically, what this is saying is we're going to find out who votes yes, and we're going to find out who votes no. So that's the first deceptive pattern practice. This also is reminiscent of recent times where supporters donated to the Donald Trump campaign. Many thought they were making a one-time donation, but their accounts were later charged for additional donations. The problem was a pre-check box, this box right here that you hopefully see, stating that the donation would be recurring. So users would need to spot the pre-check box, read the disclaimer, and uncheck the box if they wanted to make a one-time donation. Many didn't. Many people lost their life savings as well. So when I talk about dark patterns, it's a term that, to me, and with research being done, is not very inclusive. It doesn't portray what we're trying to accomplish here as far as what is the term, what is the best term. So Harry Brignall, cognitive scientist, designer, and UX consultant, who I've spoken to about this many times, he's written a book on this. He coined the term back in 2010. This has gained traction in legal circles, and it's still widely used today. And for me, connotation and inclusion are the issue. Connotation being dark, being that the word dark, and inclusion as well. I mean, when we think of dark black, it's a different thing. So if you've ever seen old Western cowboy movies, you know that the bad guy was dressed in black, white good guy was dressed in white. So research has shown that there is patterns here that are exclusionary.
Todd, sorry, we still can't see those slides. I don't
You
know.
can't see the slide still?
It's still on the first slide,
Oh,
especially the examples that you're trying to. Maybe just click on those like you're clicking there. So as you go, please.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Right there. I don't know why I tested this, and of course, yesterday it was not. And don't know why this is giving me grief today. All right, how's that?
We can see the slide that's instead of slave master, but I think when you go on to the next one, just let us know, and then we'll let you know if it's working.
Can you see that change?
Yes, yeah, brilliant.
Okay. Good. So that's the example that I was saying, the first known example of a deceptive pattern. So as you can see, the big circle, yes, the small circle, no. There is the example that I mentioned from the Trump campaign of the check box that needed to be unchecked to make it a one-time donation. So that's another deceptive pattern. let's go on here. So we've seen the terminology, slave master, white hat, black hat, so on and so forth. I feel, and there are many people in technical circles that are replacing these with more inclusionary terminology. So when Harry and I talked, he told me he considered my words about dark patterns, and he had input from others as well. And he actually changed the name of the book to Deceptive Patterns, and did not use dark patterns, which is great. I personally think that's a more fitting term. The reason why is a deceptive pattern is deliberate. It is with intent. An anti-pattern has no intent, but it's harmful, or it is bad UX. And I'm sure you can think of a case where we've seen these before. So we've split these up into barriers and categories. Some of the barriers, and we have a long list of barriers. So wording, if anybody has used Ticketmaster, for instance, um, you have a 10-minute time limit to buy a ticket. If you don't buy that ticket in 10 minutes, then the whole process starts over. So I myself have been caught with that, buying in the middle of the process of buying a ticket, and I get distracted. I need to go do something, and then I come back, and then I have to do the whole thing all over again. And then you have invasive patterns as well. Do you want this app to control your microphone, your camera, so on and so forth, geolocation? Some examples are trick questions. Infinite scroll is a big one. As an accessibility professional, if you've ever done an audit of a website and it's infinite scroll, how many times has it taken you what seems like forever to get to the footer, if possible, to audit the footer? Copy and paste disabled, timers, and that invasive asking the user to enable feature. So here's some I've run up against. The anti-pattern of unsubscribe shaming. I got this in the mail, in my email the other day, and I never considered I was besties with a company before. And I didn't really miss them that much, so I never answered the email. Another one being, if you've ever used DoorDash on mobile, in the first square for Express, you can get it even faster, but it's covering the $2.99 add-on charge. So somebody that's just clicking through they're not going to get that. Another one being hidden costs. So you are in the process of buying something, and then you get to the end and you have a $2.99 charge for care and handling, whatever that is. Which again, it's a deceptive pattern. And this was taken from proflowers.com. So it's the care and handling charge is disclosed on the last step. Just see deceptive to me. And then there's pay to play. So if you've been on Duolingo and you've tried to keep your streak, I haven't been on in a while, so I don't know if this is still going on or not. But you can keep your streak for, in this case, €349. So there's all this bad UX, all these deceptive patterns that we see. That a deceptive pattern being that pattern which tries to hold the user and keep them trapped in where they are, and in some way either getting money from them or not. I had somebody ask me, well, what about companies like Twitter and Google and Meta? Well, they wanted to know, how will you get them to change? We won't. we won't get them to change it. And even though a lot of those, there's a couple of those, well, Google, there are people in the W3C that work at Google, but I don't expect them to jump right on board. We have ethical web principles. So the W3C tag ethical web principles state that the web should be a platform that helps people and provides a positive social benefit. And the ethical principles for web machine learning, it's a document that discusses ethical issues associated with using machine learning and outlines considerations for web technologies that enable related use cases. So here are the links. I can give those to people if they want them. They can read. My slides are at my website. The gethack.com is for the document itself, the framework, the fast framework, and then the last two here are those web principles and the web machine learning ethical standards. So that is it for me. It's been a bumpy ride, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Very good presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Todd?
Yeah, I have one. How did you get into accessibility since you've been doing it for so long?
So I've had it was actually when I started learning way back when, I was doing table-based layouts for websites for small companies. And then I noticed that one of my family members was using a screen reader, and that was, geez, that was so long ago. I think it was Jaws. I want to say it was Jaws. But friends, family members, who, when I saw the looks on their faces when they were trying to access something that is inaccessible on the web, and seeing frustration and hurt and even anger, that fueled me to jump right in and learn about accessibility from day one. From there, I followed all the people that I followed, bought all the books that I could, and just immersed myself in it. And here I am, 20 some odd years later, and still fighting the fight, and sometimes even remembering that I'm still asking people to make sure color contrast is good 25 years later on some things. So yeah, it's that's how I started.
Yeah, I've got a question which follows up onto that. So because you've been in the field for a while, what are the common things that you notice? Obviously, you mentioned color contrast already, but things that people are making the same mistakes time and time again. And then I've got another question adding on to that is the fact that there's new technologies out right now, including some AI tools that could help. Do you feel like they're worth investing towards, or is it the case that it's still, get your basics right first?
So the things I see often are, as I said, color contrast, a lot of missing alt text in images, whether it be on a website or whether it be on Twitter. Seeing it on Twitter just drives me mad. It's and there's so many others. Empty buttons, empty labels, no labels in forms. Just things that developers these days aren't taking into consideration because, as I said at one conference, they're not thinking about the people on the other side of the glass. Hey, it works on my machine. Well, we're not shipping your machine. We're shipping a totally different thing. It's not your machine. So, it's so many, it's even the readability of code, because in in development, there's a large population of disabled developers. And when I talk to them, there's one common theme. I can't use Tailwind because it's absolutely unreadable when it's, when the code's like 2 inches thick on your code editor. All that code. So there's so many. And as far as AI goes, I think AI is, I use AI when I do transcriptions and captions for my podcast. And while I can see the benefit, I don't think it's there yet. I don't think it will be there for quite some time. With the advent of Chat GPT and all that, maybe it's going in the right direction, but right now, I don't think AI is the answer. AI cannot manually test a website for accessibility issues, so AI is not going to be able to tab through a website. It's not going to be able to shift tab back through a website. It's not going to be able to do all those things that people need to do, accessibility engineers need to do. So I hope that maybe someday I can just press a button and let something do its thing. So, but I don't think we're there yet.
That's great. Yeah, no, I agree. Like it's fancy, but it's not ready yet. I don't want to steal all the questions, but I've got another question as well, which might be more for the whole panel anyway. But in sense of, and I'll stop asking questions in 1 minute. But in sense of like the tools that are out there that are good tools to use, and it might not just be one tool, but what would be the recommendation for like developers out there to say, okay, if you're building websites and applications, these are the tools that are highly recommended to go for?
There's a few that I use when auditing, and that being Axe, for the Axe extension in the browser, Axe when it's in the Playwright testing. What else? There's the IBM Equal Access Checker, which is it's a browser extension. Another browser extension is the ARC toolkit from TPGI. The TPGI color contrast analyzer, when I do color contrast checks. Those are the kind of tools that I use when auditing that I find help. They all pretty much do the same except for the color contrast checker. Like the Wave extension from WebAIM, the Axe extension from DQ, the IBM Equal Access Checker, and the ARC toolkit. If I go through the 4 of those during an audit, something's going to pick up on something that the others didn't. So I kind of, weigh everything out there. Those are the 4 main. And then the rest of my thing is usually just, manual testing and screen reader testing.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Hey, Ruben here.
Ruben.
One thing that I oftentimes encourage the teams that I work with is a tool called Axe Core. It's also produced by DQ. And why specifically I really encourage teams to use Axe Core is it's because it can be very easily introduced into the CI/CD pipeline in order to help developers catch those issues, before it actually hits their web page. Now, DQ is very, very open. That Axe catches about 50%, and that 50% doesn't include really big blockers, but I think it's a very good step in the right direction, and a big step into what I would consider, taking accessibility and making sure that it lives across the whole development process.
Yeah, no, good shout, because I think we've used it or something similar in a development model before, and it's just going to help the developers to get to a point, right? It's not going to do everything, but it's going to be there, so then at least you can do some of the things that you might just be glossing over and missing out. Yeah, no, good shout.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other? Sorry, go on.
Lighthouse is powered by Axe Core. What else? Just Axe. Playwright uses Axe Core. And there's one other that I'm forgetting that uses, I think it's Pally uses Axe Core. So a lot of them use Axe Core. It's very, very, very handy tool. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. Any other questions for Todd? If not, we can move over to Daisy. Just let us know when you're ready, Daisy.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm going to be talking about making mobile apps accessible for every user. So a little about me. I'm a senior front-end engineer at MMT. I'm an accessibility champion at MMT. And at the front end, I'm primarily like a web developer day to day. I was recently on a React Native project at MMT, and that kind of kickstarted the questions I had, which kind of went around accessibility for mobile. Since I was very kind of clued up on accessibility for web, when I was in the mobile space, I was like, oh, this is a bit different, but a bit similar. And just a little bit about me, I have a Windows laptop and an Android phone. So I don't have that much experience with sort of iPhone and Apple, like hands-on experience. So I am a bit more clued up on Android. Hopefully we can broaden that out soon. Cool. So just to, the scope could be very big. There's a lot to talk about in accessibility. It's very hard to sort of narrow it down, but just to kind of give you a bit of an overview, I'm just going to be talking about sort of how to code or sort of check, audit mobile apps for accessibility, both Android and iOS, not including website accessibility, sort of when you have a web page on your mobile phone, not really going to cover that as much. Not really going to cover Internet of Things, once again, very broad, very different screens and way people interact with things. And as a front-end engineer myself, I'm going to focus on the code more than the design aspects, as we sort of have a bit more control over the code rather than design. So when I first started on this React Native project and I started thinking about accessibility, I didn't actually know the differences between web and mobile accessibility. And that was kind of where I started. And Todd can correct me if anything is wrong on this slide. But essentially, there's no specific guidelines or different guidelines from web. If you sort of look at the guidelines, a lot of them do kind of carry over. And I think for mobile, some are a tiny bit more important. I mean, touch target is really important on web, but maybe even more important on mobile. And it's just sort of seeing the key ones specifically for mobile. There are apparently some more specific guidelines in the works. And yeah, at the minute, nothing kind of solid, but potentially in the future. So that's kind of one of the things I was interested when I first started looking. And then I just found some resources if you do want to look into it in a bit more depth. So the W3C has sort of like a nice little overview sort of paragraph on their website about sort of just, you know, standard guidelines. And then the W3 link in the middle is like a really in-depth article. So if you do want to really get into it, that one's pretty good. And then I always think it's good to sort of see what others are doing, especially kind of big companies like the BBC and the government. So I found these two like sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, but criteria that they use to make sure whatever they put out is accessible by their standards. So if you're ever looking to set or define standards for your company, I mean, those two are great resources, especially because the BBC and the government have such a wide and diverse reach of audiences, and they definitely want to make sure their stuff is accessible. So tools make our lives a lot easier, and there's quite a lot of tools to help with accessibility on mobiles. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those. So if you've ever released an app to the Play Store, you might have seen the pre-launch report. Kinda is quite similar to Lighthouse in terms of the tabs, like performance, accessibility, a bit similar in that sense of things. Quite similar to Lighthouse in that sense, it will sort of flag up like ways in which it thinks it's not quite accessible or could be improved. So it's a good sort of thing before you sort of hit the Play Store. It just kind of flags up stuff. And it does sort of, as it says, unique errors, warnings, and minor issues, pretty much like Lighthouse would do on a website. Another one from Android is the accessibility scanner. This is an app which you can download, and you'd sort of take a screenshot, or you can do a full user journey, you can do a page or a full journey. And then it will sort of analyze that screenshot or recording, and then it will sort of flag, as you can see in orange, the kind of issues it found with the page. Very similar to the previous tool, very similar to Lighthouse again, how it does it. This one, of course, is, whilst you're developing. And these are the things that sort of can pick up. It can kind of pick up the what I call quite easy things for computers to audit accessibility around, sort of touch target size, contrast, labels, quite easy for things to pick up. So that's a good one again, especially because you probably don't want to wait till pre-launch to pick up some of the issues. And this one I quite like. It's quite good. Cool. Apple have a very similar thing. It's called the Accessibility Inspector. I've not actually used it myself, but you essentially run an audit, as you can see on that picture. And once again, it picks up quite similar issues, sort of contrast, labels, touch target zones. So yeah, they're sort of essentially the equivalent for Apple on that one. And if you want to know more, there's a link to a video. So when I was sort of researching tools, these are some of the other tools I came across. I didn't look into them too much, but essentially there's a lot of tools out there. One of the things, they do seem to pick up quite similar things, sort of as with Web and Lighthouse and Axe, they do sort of audit as much as they can. And as Todd said, they'll probably all pick up something slightly different, but a lot of it will be the same. But it's good to know. And then probably the most important point is, like, computers at the minute can't audit a lot of what we want to test. They can't audit if it sort of makes sense to people or if it has meaning. In the accessibility group, we kind of did an analysis of how much sort of tools can pick up versus how much you'd have to manually test. And I can't remember the exact figures, but just say around 30% could be manually automated, but like a big chunk of it is just down to manual testing and just playing with the app yourself. So whilst the tools are great, they pick up stuff really quickly. Never sort of forget your manual testing. Screen readers. So when I develop for web, I always test with a screen reader. And sort of before I started on the React Native project, I was aware that screen readers for mobile existed. I just personally hadn't used one myself. So with Android, it's called TalkBack. I'm pretty sure it comes installed with every Android phone. It was installed on mine. And yeah, it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's the screen reader for Android. Took me a bit of time to get used to, sort of especially with gestures. Things I used to do, like swipe up, I couldn't really do anymore. I had to sort of learn how to control the device a bit differently. But in saying that, once you sort of pick it up, much like a computer screen reader, you kind of get the hang of it a bit. And yes, so if you're a developer, the emulators don't have TalkBack installed by default, but you can install it if you use Android Studio and the emulator has a Play Store sort of there, you can just download it. So that's super handy that you don't have to wait till it's sort of out on the market. You can test it, you know, with your acceptance criteria. Same as Apple, most people have heard of VoiceOver, which is the same as the sort of computer laptop one. Once again, I haven't actually used this one myself, but screen readers kind of, you know, do what they say on the tin. There's nothing too crazy about them. There is a little demo if you do want to like dive deeper into how VoiceOver actually works and how you control the screen. And also BrowserStack has screen readers on quite a lot of their devices. They have a list on their website. I think it's on that link. So if you're ever sort of not sure or you can't do it for some reason, give BrowserStack a try if you've got a license. As you can see in the picture, it says screen reader on. So yeah, that's a good tool if you are struggling with the emulators or anything like that. And this one didn't really fit into my presentation anywhere, but I just did want to give a shout out to switch controls. Obviously, screen readers are much easier to sort of test. I guess most people won't have access to switch controls unless you would need them or are sort of quite invested in accessibility testing. But essentially, switch controls are things you can use to navigate the screen. Maybe if you're not able to touch the screen or anything like that, and you can also have multiple switch controls. I saw when I was researching this that you can set the volume controls to act as switch controls. I didn't personally test this myself, but I thought that was quite a good little hack because most people won't be able to get switch controls. And so that could be a good way to test it if you don't have the hardware. Cool. So when I was learning about it, I came across this playlist was sort of the best one. It kind of gives you a really good overview of everything Android are doing for accessibility, and it talks you through from sort of more a tech point of view. Accessibility sort of shows you the features. Yeah, that's a good playlist. There wasn't quite a similar one on Apple. The closest I could find was this playlist, which talked about all the accessibility on Apple, but more like to show off the products a bit. But it's quite good because it does show off all of the accessibility features on, like, as it mentions here, an Apple Watch, which I personally don't code for necessarily, but it shows you sort of how Apple and other companies have thought about how to make things accessible. And especially with the Apple Watch one, it shows how accessibility benefits everyone, sort of through vibrations and stuff like that. Everyone can benefit from that. So it's quite a good playlist. The Android one is slightly sort of better for tech people. And then coding. So as I mentioned, I started on a React Native project. And yeah, so there's some really good docs on React Native. They're quite in-depth. The link I provided is just sort of like a good overview. And for React Native, it provides APIs for both Android and iOS, and sometimes they're slightly different. The docs sort of list, which operating system it's for, which is really good. As I said, the docs does sort of lay it out quite well for you. And yeah, they do differ slightly. So I guess when you're testing, just make sure you're testing it on both. Flutter, personally not use Flutter, but they also have some documentation. And the things they seem to focus on are large font, screen readers, and sufficient contrast. There's also a video they put out about sort of, yeah, just Flutter and accessibility, really. Their docs weren't as good, in my opinion, as React Native, but I've not used Flutter before, so it's a bit hard to say. And there's so many different languages out there and ways to develop apps that it's kind of hard to say in detail. I'd have liked to gone into a bit more detail about React Native, but there's so much to cover. It's kind of easier if you sort of research yourself based on the language or the framework that you use. And then going on to React Native again, ESLint Ali as a web developer, and if I get to choose sort of the front end build, I always like to include ESLint Ali because it's not very intrusive, but it gives you pointers and it helps out quite a lot, I think. And it makes sort of engineers, whilst you're coding, kind of think, oh, actually, I have missed that out. And it was good to see they have an ESLint plugin specifically for React Native, which is great. Up to date. I think it's pretty much the same as ESLint Ali, but just a bit more specific and still well maintained. So if you're ever sort of defining a build, that one's a great one to keep in mind. Automated testing. So you can help yourself by including accessibility into your automated tests. So Flutter provide an API, and it checks if your apps meet UI Flutter's accessibility recommendation. So once again, it kind of highlights how the code can help you with kind of the easier stuff like tap target and contrast. It's very good at that. And you can add that to your tests so you spend maybe less time on the accessibility scanner, for example. And with Android, if you're coding specifically for Android, you can use Espresso, and their one's quite simple. You just import the accessibility check library, and then you just enable that. So very small things you can do. Once again, as you can see on both of them, not very much code, and it might add that little bit of extra checking for you. There's also JustAx, which is a package, and I like this sort of thing they put on their website. Where about 30% of issues are found by automated, which kind of highlights how great tools are, but how much they still can't do. And we can't just solely rely on them. You can't think, oh, I've done this in this tool, it's fine. There's this little code snippet of sort of how much code it would take. So yeah, if you're sort of maybe reviewing PRs for code and you have testing, maybe it's worth flagging. Oh, maybe you could add a test for accessibility, for example. Just something small, as you can see, not much code at all. And then yeah, go and see for yourself. Like learn more about people who have disabilities is always really insightful because everyone is so different. You sort of think about the common ones like screen readers, and you think people without sort of maybe can't use the keyboard, but actually it's really diverse. So I watched these two great videos. So people might have seen the Apple one. It was sort of semi-popular a few months ago, and it's just sort of like a marketing video, if anything, but it does actually show you all the different ways people could use devices sort of with their feet. And like when you hold up your phone and it reads out sort of a sign if you can't see or have eye problems. So that one's a great one just to get a really quick overview of like the diverse range. And then GitHub made, I think they did 2 profiles of people with disabilities. This one, she controlled her computer through eye tracking, which was pretty fascinating. She was coding games with eye tracking. And there was also another person who was a quadriplegic, I think, and he had these like custom mouth pieces which he put in his mouth, and it acted like a mouse, which I hadn't seen before. And it was very interesting how sort of people have adapted the technology to suit their needs and how how they do it. So it's always great to broaden your horizons, to think about the end user. Yeah, and that's everything from me. If you want to stay in touch, you can add me on LinkedIn, or if you have any sort of specific questions, feel free to email me. Yeah, so that's everything for me. If you've got any questions.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any questions for Daisy? If not, I can think of one. So you mentioned when you were developing on the apps that you didn't have pretty much access to the iOS Apple devices. How did you come over that, or how did you get over that in the sense of, because obviously it's best to test on both devices and manually test it. How did you come across that?
Yeah, it was a tricky one. It was an interesting project in which I knew I was only going to be on there for a short term. Otherwise, I would have got the full setup, full laptop and phone. I think Browser Stack is the best for that, especially if you're new to developing. I mean, Browser Stack, you do need a license, so maybe it's not the most accessible in that sense. But yeah, it does offer screen readers, which is sort of a kind of good way to get around it. It was also an interesting project in which it was very different to what we normally work on, and there wasn't any accessibility criteria set up. It was a big question mark for the team, which is why I sort of broadened out to learn about it. So I think in the future that team would definitely want to develop its own acceptance criteria.
Okay, cool. And did you come across any sort of normally what happens is that when you're working on websites and things, then some carousels become outdated because obviously they're not accessible anymore. Or do you come across any sort of elements when you're developing the app that you have to kind of reach out to something else to kind of swap components out, or was that not the case?
On the app I worked on, not really, because one of the key benefits they did, and I always, push for web and mobile, is using out of the box, I forget what you call them, but essentially components which are developed by React Native, sort of, they are made accessible, sort of using a button tag instead of using a div and styling it like a button. It has all of that out of box functionality, which it brings in. So I always advocate for that. But no, on the app we worked on, I didn't see anything too bad like that.
Okay, cool. Any other questions from anybody else? No? Okay, thanks, Daisy. Ruben, just let us know when you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, and I just want to double check that you can see my screen with a presentation up.
We can, awesome. But it's, yeah, I don't know if you just click next, just double check. It's not in full screen
absolutely.
mode, basically.
Yeah, so I am doing not full screen mode because I'm going to be doing some demos in the other tabs, which should be visible up at the top, correct? Awesome. All right, hello everyone. I'm Ruben Nic. I'm a senior software engineer specializing in accessibility, where I've worked with quite a few different companies, namely Webflow and Shopify, doing accessibility things for both of them. You can find my Twitter handle at Ruben Sandwich. I've chosen to name myself after, the great sandwich that I hope to one day live up to. And I was unfortunately affected by the recent Shopify layoffs, so I am currently looking for work. Now, you might hear a laundry machine going on behind me. I refuse to apologize for the fact that I prefer clean sheets and shirts. And considering that I'm looking for work, I will also greatly accept a laundry detergent sponsorship if anybody has access to that. With all of that out of the way, I want to welcome you to Accessibility Checking with the Chrome DevTools. Over the years, the Google Chrome team has built a wide variety of accessibility tooling into Chrome. And I want to highlight just a few of them, ones that I kind of use, I would say, on a daily basis that help me understand the accessibility of a web page and pinpoint where accessibility issues are happening. The first one, but before we start talking about these tools, we need to understand one thing. We need to understand something called the accessibility tree. Now, when we look at a HTML web page, right, there is something called the DOM, the document object model, which is kind of like a layout of how your web page, the different elements of your web page and their children and their nodes and their elements, all of that stuff. Just as we have a DOM, we also have a DOM tree. We also have an accessibility tree. Now, what the accessibility tree is it's a paring down of that DOM tree with certain elements that are important for assistive technologies. Now, assistive technologies includes a lot of different things. Obviously, screen readers, voice control software, switches, but also keyboards. Keyboards are actually the biggest assistive technology in use. And switches and certain other assistive technologies actually emulate keyboards. Now, if you see here on the right, we have, link, login, button, dismiss, button, learn more. This is oftentimes when I talk about the accessibility tree, people kind of focus on because, they're usually most familiar with a keyboard and they usually do keyboard testing. But that's not the only elements in the accessibility tree, because the accessibility tree can be cut and parsed in different directions. This is only for this hypothetical accessibility tree. This is only the interactive elements. So if you're tabbing through a page, you're slicing the accessibility tree to only see the interactive elements. Now, hot tip, you can press Shift Tab to move focus backwards. It's very good. I've seen a lot of people, they hit an element and they want to go to the previous element and then just hit that tab button continuously. You can Shift Tab. It's wonderful. So the accessibility tree actually more looks like this, where we have a banner and then that link login is under that banner. We have a main element and that button dismiss is under that main element. We have a heading about us, a button, learn more. It's a tree. It's not just a straight list where you go up from the top and then always move down from the bottom. There's a wide variety of different technologies. In VoiceOver, it's called the router. In different assistive technologies, they have different names of it, where you can specifically select, okay, I only want to go through the links on the page, or I only want to go through the buttons on the page, or I only want to go through the landmarks, which is like main, banner, section, article, etc. And this is why you kind of hear accessibility specialists talk so much about headings, is specifically with screen readers, the most common way to slice the accessibility tree is with headings. And then, once you hit a heading you like, you can then progress down through the accessibility tree in that way. So how can we actually look at this, right? That's a lot, but let's actually figure out how we can look at this. So I have this web page up. It's just a Google developer page. It is one on accessibility. Now I have the DevTools open here on the right, and you'll see there is over here in your styles computed layout, the arrows. You can click accessibility, and you'll see that I have this checked right here. It's an experimental feature called enable full page accessibility tree. Then after that, you select this little guy, and now you actually see the accessibility tree for this specific website. And if you see, it's like nicely laid out, right? These are your different landmarks, banner, main, content info. We see there is some static elements, right? The paragraph, the static text. These are all, really nicely and wonderfully laid out. It shows you it's a tree. It shows you where things are together. Not only that, but if you select, let's say, a landmark, you can go down here in source order viewer. You can select that, and this will tell you in what order specifically in this one, mainly a screen reader, but other assistive technologies as well, will go through this. These two are clustered together, so that one's probably a little bit worse of an example to show. But right here, we see it's going to start here, and then it's going to move here, and then it's going to move here. It's worth digging down deep and looking through all of these and just getting a little bit comfortable of how the accessibility tree works, how different elements are related to each other, etc. Now, to go through that again, this is how to view the accessibility tree. By the way, on my Twitter, I will share these slides afterwards because I know, we have to go pretty quickly to hit all of these. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the accessible name. And this is where a lot of engineers and other folks, they start to get a little bit confused. And I feel like what they end up doing is they just throw ARIA label on everything in some fit of passion, which, your heart's in the right place. I love it. But let's actually talk about how accessible name is calculated. And so there is actually a whole W3 guideline called Accessible Name and Description Computation. It's on version 1.2. And by the way, this is going to be at the test at the end of this. I hope you can read quickly because there's a good 24 to 27 pages. Good luck. Actually, accessible name calculation is pretty easy. There are some edge cases which the W3 document goes over, but here is usually how it goes. It goes in an order of priority. The first one is, does this element, is it linked to another element with ARIA labeled by? If it is, that is its accessible name. If it isn't, then we drop into the second priority, which is ARIA label. So if you have something with ARIA labeled by and ARIA labeled on it, ARIA labeled by is actually going to take priority and set its accessible name. And your ARIA label, you basically put it on there for decoration. It has no actual computed value. If none of those are set, then what's set is actually the text contents of the node. And this includes children nodes. So let's say you have a button, and in that button, you have multiple different children nodes. Both of those, the children nodes text will be combined and set as its accessible name. This is oftentimes a pretty big problem that I have seen as I've gone through and fixed accessibility issues on different websites and apps. The last one is title. Now, title doesn't apply to every element, so it's on here, but I think it's pretty safe to ignore in my professional opinion. So let's demo this. Let me show you how you can get accessible name calculation and how it'll outline those 4 different places where it can come from and how to read that. So we'll go right back over here and let's turn off the accessibility tree because I think that's actually, it makes it easier to actually do this. And let's select an element. Let's inspect this paragraph. And then if we go down here to name, this right here is on the heading right here. It's showing us what the accessible name is and where it's coming from. So if we see here, there's nothing in ARIA labeled by. ARIA labeled by has nothing, but it has a text child node, which is the paragraph. And that text child node is make your website more readable. And so that is the accessible name for this H1, right? And if we go and select different elements right here, we can go and slowly, figure all of these out. And so you might have to go up a little bit specifically for this one. It looks like computed properties. Ooh, this is not ARIA hidden true over here. It's, you see, accessibility node not exposed. So this specific element is actually not exposed to the accessibility tree. Looks like we found a little bit of a bug. Didn't expect that one. But over here, right, we go on to the next element and we see the name is Chrome DevTools. But as you see, as we walk through this, we can kind of see where the accessible name is coming from. And even if that element isn't actually even exposed. So this right here is actually going to be completely skipped over by an assistive technology. So we've already found one issue just by looking through that. Here's another web page. This is the web page for the American Healthcare Marketplace. No comment on that, but I want to show you an accessibility issue over here. So we have this modal that pops up, right? And it allows you to, select different options. And so if we go and inspect this element, the button, when we look at the accessible name, if you see the accessible name is start here, click here if you can enroll, update income/household, use your new coverage. So it's actually grabbing the text content of every element in its children. So, you see all of these text content is being given the button's accessible name. Obviously, that's a pretty poor accessible name. It's going to be very confusing if somebody is navigating through this website using assistive technologies. And once again, how you do that is you make sure to select an element in the DOM, select the accessibility pane, and then view its accessible name, and it'll tell you how it actually got that name. Now, some of the references that I have over here, well, actually, we're in a bonus round because we still have extra time, and I want to teach you about how to check whole page, checking whole page contrast. This is something near and dear to my heart, as I'm someone with low vision, and color contrast is incredibly important to me. And the Chrome dev team have gracefully built tools to check the whole page color contrast. It is hidden, however, so I want to show you how to actually find it. So how you find it is in the dev tools, click these double dots, and then you go into more tools, and then you go into CSS overview. And then once you go into here, capture, and as you scroll down here, it'll show you all of the different colors used on your specific web page, but it will also show you contrast issues, and it will group these contrast issues, which let me resize this, by CSS class. So we see both of these elements have the same CSS classes. So if you fix this CSS class, you've actually fixed it for both of these elements. It also tells you right here it meets WCAG 2.1 AA standard currently, which is 4.5, but it doesn't meet AAA, which now my mind is blinking whether it's 7 or 7.5. So we'll fix that in post. 7. Thank you so much, Todd. And over here, we see there's another element grouping where they all have heading footer. We are hitting the AA standard, but not the AAA. So this is another great tool of going, instead of inspecting every element specifically, you can use this tool to view those elements grouped by their CSS class, which is oftentimes how you're styling it through, how you're actually styling these elements. And find that CSS class, fix it, and fix it across quite a few different elements. Usually the first one that it shows up here is it's just kind of like the standard elements, right? That's why we see a bunch of anchors and strongs. So these ones don't have any CSS class, so they're all just grouped together. So if you see that, that's what's happening in the first grouping of issues. Don't be alarmed. So once again, how you do that is you select the triple dots. I don't know what to call that. It's not a hamburger menu. It's just like more. And then from there, more tools, and then CSS overview, capture that overview, scroll down, and you'll see those color contrast issues. And selecting those elements will take you to them. It'll tell you the CSS classes. It's really wonderful. It makes the job way easier. So the references that you can learn more is the Chrome DevTools accessibility pane. This links to the Chrome DevTools, just their reference page. It goes over quite a little bit more than I've had time to cover. I highly suggest reading that. The W3C accessible name and description computation. If you have a lot of free time, it's worth the read. But I promise it's not as difficult as it sounds, and as the included flowcharts will make you believe. And then also the CSS overview panel, Chrome DevTools reference. I'm Ruben Nic. Thank you so much. I hope this has been educational for you, and I hope that you can use these tools in your daily work to find the root cause of accessibility issues on your web pages and web apps.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd even realized some of those tools existed. So thank you for sharing with that. Do you have any questions for Ruben? Okay.
I guess the same question as I asked Todd. How did you get into accessibility?
So, the one of the dark jokes about, accessibility is that people get in for two reasons. Their employer gets sued, or them or someone they love develops a disability. Both of those happened in rapid succession for me in my early 20s. I worked for a museum conglomerate, and they were hit with an accessibility lawsuit here in the United States. And I volunteered to help fix those. And then sort of in a little bit of the same time frame, I was diagnosed with keratoconus, which is a degenerative eye condition, which basically my corneas are misshapen. And so it can't be corrected with lenses because lenses assume that your cornea is uniformly misshapen as opposed to a lot of valleys and peaks. And so what that looks like is my vision is always blurry. It can kind of change a little bit daily. And then at nighttime, I have night blindness because my eyes, light doesn't reflect into my corneas as much as normal folks. So I can't see super well at night, which I don't like that the trend now is to have very dark restaurants. So like you usually see me like pulling out my phone, trying to read menus and look at the, what the bar offers. That's usually at the back of the, right behind the barkeep.
Oh, thank you.
I've got a question. So with what you showed us with Chrome, have you had a look at what other browsers offer, and are they similar, or is it lacking behind?
Yeah, so other browsers I think are starting to catch up. Safari, they're starting to they do have an accessibility node inspector. I think they also have something to view the accessibility tree, but those are pretty recent, not I would say as well developed as the ones in Chrome. Firefox does have a tool to view tab order, which to my I'm a good 90% confident on this, but not 100% confident. Chrome does not have. So there are good tools, I would say, kind of across the board. But right now, I believe that Chrome is the leader in default accessibility tooling in their browser. Good question, by the way.
Thank you. That's cool. And then the bug that you spotted, how would you recommend to resolve that? Especially that breadcrumb one, I think it was.
Yeah. Let's inspect this really quickly again. Accessibility node not inspected. So it's just a span right here, which I think is actually kind of a misuse of the element. So I would like turn this into like either a paragraph, which right here, I think this hasn't updated correctly, or some other element. But I think what's happening here is because you're telling it it's a span, which just is saying inline. It doesn't really, you can use text nodes over there. I think it's kind of confusing the accessibility tree. So what you could do actually is like you could take this span and then put a paragraph inside of it. I think that's probably what I would recommend. And I think that would fix that completely. And we look at this span. Oh, when I did that, it looks like I didn't put it in. This is okay. I think this is the tooling trying to be a little bit clever and making things difficult for me. All right, that looks good. And if I click off that, element is not interested for accessibility. I don't know why this is kicking it over here. And this should update, but I'm guessing maybe because I'm updating it in line, it's getting it confused. But I would do something like that, quite honestly.
Would you also, is there an option to put an Arial label in there? Like, would that be one of the options, or you wouldn't
Ooh,
recommend it?
wow. You know, I think this would be a place where you could do an ARIA label. And let's see if it picks that up really quickly. No. Here we go. Computed properties, accessibility node not exposed. I don't know exactly why that's showing up, but if we look at this, I would have to do a little bit more and try to figure out why is this ignored, right? Because it's saying it's ignored and then there's static text accessibility. I would have to look at it a little bit more. You're kind of catching me on the spot.
Sorry, it wasn't
No,
meant
no,
to
no. It's
catch
a good
up.
question, and now I'm flustered.
But no, this is really good to kind of know about, and it's the first time I've come across it, which is awesome. Anybody got
Maybe
questions?
if we look at here, over here is ignored. So maybe there's something above it actually being ignored. Anyway, sorry.
That's okay. Anybody else got questions? Ruben? Go for it, Marilyn.
Thank you. So, Ruben, you mentioned in your talk about companies being sued because they don't meet accessibility standards. Do you think that that is one of the avenues we should be looking at to try and push accessibility within technology companies? Or do you think that there are other ways that we can kind of like try and guide companies in the right direction?
After I answer this, I definitely want to hear also Daisy and Todd's opinion. My opinion is that it's complicated. The unfortunate truth is that, especially until I would say the pandemic, digital accessibility was, I don't want to say not taken seriously, but a little bit more on the back burner, and there wasn't as many companies really looking into it. I think there's a wide variety of reasons for that, but I do think that is one benefit that has come out of the pandemic is digital accessibility is now exploding and it's now being taken very seriously, which I'm happy about. And before, obviously, that it seemed like one of the only avenues to actually have change was accessibility lawsuits, which, kind of sucks, honestly. I'm not proud about that as a species. But, obviously my hope is that we move past that and really kind of build empathy and understand that humans have a wide breadth of ability, and we should cater to all of those. So my answer is that it's complicated, and I mean, my end goal is to make sure that accessibility happens, and sometimes, that happens through pretty sucky means, and I'm not happy about that. But if it can raise access for folks, then, I'm happy about that. But at the same time, I do think there should be laws and regulations stipulating it, and specifically, I know in the EU, I know a lot of folks here are from the UK, and EU law doesn't apply to you folks anymore, but in either 2024 or 2025, the Web Accessibility Directive is going to take effect. And I think the result of that is that, the number of lawsuits, accessibility lawsuits in the EU is going to rise significantly.
Cool, thank you.
Daisy, Todd?
I would say no. And the reason why being C-suite level stakeholders, they're not going to care about that. We're just going to push that onto our legal team. We'll let the legal team handle it. The approach I've taken for the past decade is I talk about money first, because that's when you're going to get people to listen, is when you address the money. So in the US, and I don't have any numbers for the EU or UK, but in the US, the last numbers we have are in 2018, and there was a almost $800 million, I believe it was 800 million or billion. I can't remember now. But it was a significant number. And I always approach it as this: do you want your stuff to be available to everybody as much as possible? Then you're going to want a piece of this disposable income from disabled users. If you shut out disabled users, you're losing out on a piece of this pie. Usually 9.9 times out of 10, somebody's going to say, oh no, we want their money. I have not run into I have run into one person before that has said, well, we don't have disabled users, but that's another soapbox rant. Usually their ears perk up. They listen. They start to listen more when you address money. You can't go for it's the right thing to do, because unfortunately, because they don't listen to that. From my experience, they don't listen to, well, you're going to get sued, because they'd rather find that out after it's too late. Like, for instance, again, using US companies here, Domino's Pizza is the big one. They could have spent $38,000 in-house to fix their accessibility issues, but they chose to drag that out and try to take it all the way to the Supreme Court, where they spent well into the seven figures to get their point across. We shouldn't have to do this, but they ended up losing still after, I believe it was 2 or 3 appeals in court system. So money is where the stakeholders and the C-suites are going to listen. As far as colleagues go, you may get, team members, colleagues that will say, oh, it is the right thing to do. And usually at that level, I say, okay, well, you've made, you've outlined this component, for instance, but it's not accessible. So who are you trying to exclude today? Sometimes that works. The other times it's just, it's part of the job. It's part of the advocacy. It's, here's my case on why we need to make this accessible for people. And if you can't get far with that, then, you're going to have a very difficult battle, which is why I always say you get buy-in from the top, the top person, you get buy-in from them, it's going to trickle down and it's going to go through the entire organization. So that's the long answer. The short answer is no, I would not use the legal approach, because it's very rarely does it work these days.
Oh yeah, it's a tricky question to ask. I don't know too much about lawsuits and accessibility, sort of in my role specifically, but I think it's, as to build on Ruben and Todd, sort of when I'm talking to people about it, sort of stakeholders and POs, you can go on the money angle a bit, which is good, sort of, especially on shops and checkouts. If you sort of keep pushing, sort of, you'll get more people checking out. Great. You can, some people also do, consider the legality of it. Obviously the laws are a bit flexible, and all of that. But yeah, you can sort of go on that aspect as well, especially AA, you know, not too hard to do AA. But then on the sort of more lower level for engineers, kind of the angle a lot of engineers think is, how can I be better? How can I code better? How can I improve my career? And it's a great way to sort of add another like bolt on to your career, sort of accessibility. So with developers, I found that angle a bit better. And then I think stemming on the whole tree is that sort of empathy, sort of that understanding. If you have or know someone with a disability, you sort of have a bit more empathy towards it. And you think, oh, I wouldn't want my mum to be excluded from this opportunity, for example. And I think sort of kind of broadening it out to learning and understanding others is sort of a better way to approach it. But yeah, it's different people in the kind of structure have kind of different priorities, but I think empathy is kind of the better connecting thread, all of them.
That's great. Yeah, good answers to that. Very difficult question. I think to add to that as well, like I feel like sometimes it comes to a point where we can only change things in the community and the environments that we're in to do as much as we can as individuals. And you know, points to like Daisy's point as well, like it could be the case that when we're in that team, before we build something, accessibility should be in the forefront of everyone's minds, rather than what happens in many projects that we've all probably been on is at the end we think about accessibility, and then it comes to a point where, like Todd's point there, you know, to fix it, Domino's could have fixed it in like less than 40k, but actually it's cost them a lot more. And I've always found it's quite painful to fix something later than, you know, having with accessibility in mind. And if we can, you know, as individuals just push that a lot more, I think that can work out better. But yeah, it's very hard to turn the bigger companies to change this. Yeah, it's gonna be a tricky one.
When I talk to development teams, I do add that, okay, you're waiting until the middle, you're waiting until the end. If you do it at the very beginning, when you're sitting down and talking about what you're going to be building, when you get to the end, you're going to run into a lot less stress. You're going to a lot less time spent on the project, a lot less going back and forth. Your developers are going to feel better, your designers are going to feel better. So managers like that approach. Less time, less stress, and then there's different levels for, you know, different approaches at different levels.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes people also think accessibility is hard to kind of, you know, it's probably hard to perfect, but it's not tricky to kind of get the base elements in. Yeah, I think sometimes the mindset might need to change a little bit as well.
Definitely.
Cool. Any more questions before we wrap up? No. I just want to thank everyone who attended and all the panelists. Like very useful talks, like very informative, and you know, this event is going to be recorded anyway, so it's going to be reached out to a lot more people as well. And I just want to thank everyone for this event. Yeah, thank you. And have a nice evening or day wherever you are.
Amazing.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.